Okay, well, thank you very much, and I'd like to ask Vee to come up and tell us a little bit about USAID research strategies for trafficking in persons and violent extremism.
I bet you thought you got rid of me, right? Back up here again. So David's fault. I'm actually happy to be able to go after the presentations made by the colleagues, because I feel like for what I have to say, it may map better to their work than to the material that I've myself prepared. The brief answer is yes, USAID is very interested in all the research that you've done. And why is that? Well, USAID as an agency is committed to rigorous research and commitment to evidence-based programming, evidence-based strategies and policies. So all your work contributes to that. It guides our program, it guides our policies, and hopefully it guides the monitoring framework for us to monitor the impact of our programming, which is really the goal, right? As our colleague pointed out, we don't want this femicide data to be just numbers that we crunch. Ultimately, we want to reduce that. We want to see the changes in the communities and the women's lives that live in those communities. So that's critical. And I think the one thing that may have been missing in my colleague's presentation is the so what. Now that we have all this information, what do you do with it? How do you operationalize those information? For example, how do we, and also in addition to that, it's great that we have all these experts up here. How do we bring those skill set, the awareness, the analysis to the communities on the ground? And that's what drives USAID's prerogative in supporting local capacity and development. Because we don't want us to parachute in, do the data, do the work, and then leave, right? We want the community to be empowered to sustain the work and monitor the progress and implement their own programs after we leave. So some thing that came to my mind during the presentations include the map that Matt did. It's very good at helping us to target. We don't have resources to, for example, implement programs across Brazil. So where can we allocate our resources to pilot interventions and hopefully then scale up to the relevant communities? For Carl and Victor's work, it's great that we see a five-fold correlation, a negative correlation with different factors. But what does that mean? Do we have to address, reduce all of those factors at once to have an effect? Or can we focus on one and have a significant impact on the trajectory of organizations? And also, given the crime rates and the predictors of violence, we don't want to be reactive to violence once it happens. We want to be predictive. So given those factors, how do we formulate a mathematical model or a strategy in building an early warning system so that we can prevent the organizations and the crime? So those are the key questions that I want you to keep in mind as researchers. Alternatives such as, how do we use technology to facilitate safer data collection, for example. Mapping is an example, but also mobile technology, maybe night vision imaging, maybe finance tracking. How do we use alternative technologies to look at some of this stuff? A little bit more on proxy indicators. How do we use, can we develop proxy indicators to look at trafficking and or violent extremism rather than trying to do population-based survey on those factors? Within USAID, following our programming cycle design, there are 4 different levels at which USAID bring in expertise and information. At the very basic level is baseline data, basic research that informs our strategies, and every 4 to 5 years, our missions established this country development cooperative strategy with the local host government. And in that, we use data, we use research to negotiate and to come to agreement with the host government on what are the development priorities that we would jointly focus on in the next few years. So within that includes a gender component analysis on the gender gaps, equity for the minority groups, and all of those. And that will help inform on what sector and how we will work on programming. The second level is monitoring and reporting on programming. This may be very basic and second nature to expertise and expert colleagues, but for our society partners on the ground, it could be very challenging because they may not know the framework to collect data. They may not have the resources to collect the data. Some of the data may be collected, with pencil on paper, which may get washed away. So there are even basic data collection is a huge issue when you come to working in developing countries with local partners. And then the third level is evaluation, which Niloufar presented, and much of that information is very much appreciated on our side, and particularly for the ones that does not have an effect or may have a negative effect. The question is then, what did you do about it? Right? Halfway through a 4 years program, you think that the markers, the indicators are backsliding. Now what do you do? And so we hope that in the design of the program and the design of the monitoring, evaluation, and learning plan, that we can use the existing theory of change and have the indicators to help inform us on how to adapt the program over time. And then at the very top level is another goal that we have that Niloufar presented was the RCTs. Hopefully we can establish research activity that can have causality and attribution capacity to it. But that's expensive. For trafficking, for example, how do you survey for prevalence in a country, right? For example, in Brazil. How do you do that meaningfully? How much money do you have to sink into that rather than funding shelters for immediate need? And it also loops back to David's point earlier, is that USA, as part of the US government, we have a yearly budget cycle, and we design at best 4 to 5 years out. So how do we design program with theories of change, with result chains that can outlast one cycle of design? How do we promote sustainability and local ownership in a way that they're not as dependent on us being there? So those are some considerations on how research can contribute to our work at USA.